Well, hey there, guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, it is part 18 of our Toys and Joys dump truck and pup trailer build. Well, the last time we visited this project, we had just finished up the dump truck at 182 hours, and I did say I was going to take a bit of a break from it for a few weeks. Just for my own sanity. These builds are a lot of work, and with the editing, the filming, plus the woodworking on top of that, honestly, these builds are exhausting for me. But that's okay. We're going to continue on now. I've had my few weeks break kind of thing, and we're going to carry on with the build. And today is part 18, but it's really part 1 of the pup trailer build. So let's get over to the bench and get right into it. Well, we're starting off this build on sheet 2 of 8, and we're going to get the chassis frame rails cut. Now, guys, these are straightforward table saw rips with a couple of 15/64 diameter holes at the end, 1/2 an inch in and then 2 inches in. Fairly straightforward pieces. So we then need our frame spacers, and we can see here on the drawing the frame spacers, it says to make 4. Now this is where I start getting confused already. There is nowhere on the plans that I have found that gives you guidance or direction as to where to glue these spacers in. If we look here, we can see the full chassis assembled drawing or picture, I guess we'll call it. And we can see 1, 2, 3, 4 frame spacers. I fully understand that. I get it. But if we look over here at sheet 4 of 8, there is another assembled drawing, and we can see 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, what's this one? Why is there 5? I'm not really sure. So I've cut 5 anyway, and I'm going to install 5 the way it shows on drawing number 4. And that way, if I don't need it and it's unnecessary, I can chisel it out. No harm, no foul, but I'd rather put it in now and chisel it out than to try to fit it in later on when the frame is all together. As well, I have cut some axles. Let's put these aside. I've cut some axles. I have cut 3 of them, even though here on the drawing, it doesn't tell you how many to cut. And I have also cut the stock for what are going to be the axle gussets. Again, it doesn't tell you how many. But if you look at the subframe drawing, it says to make 3 subframes. So one could only go to reason that you need 3 axles. And for these gussets, you can see on that drawing that there's 2 on each axle. So we're going to require 6 of those. Guys, for the center hole, the through hole here, I have drilled it a 1/4 inch diameter, even though it shows 5/16 on our drawing. Now, I explained in the dump truck build that for my liking, I try to keep the axle holes at 1/4 inch because that is the size of the pen mandrel that I use to turn my wheels. But I also said that if it's a through axle hole, I drill it to 5/16. And while that is true, and this is a through axle hole, I kept this at a 1/4 inch because the holes that we drilled in the wheels that we turned earlier in the series, the holes in these wheels are a little longer because the axles of the dump truck were not through axles. So I kind of had to accommodate things here now because of the way that I made the wheels in the first part of the series. No big deal. You guys can accommodate it as you wish. So what I'm going to do for starters is I need to figure out where to glue these 5 spacers. One is very obviously, we can see it here, and it's on both pages 2 and 4. One is obviously right here, right at the end. And that's no big deal. That's a no-brainer. But where are the rest? Well, on sheet 4, we can see that one is right in this area right here. But if we look on sheet 2, we can see that there's a frame top plate. And that top plate measures 1 5/8 of an inch back from the front. So that is where the edge of this one is going to be placed, at 1 5/8 of an inch back from the front of our frame. So we've got those two figured out, but what about the other three? Well, if we look right here on sheet 2, we can see that right in the corner of each of our frame spacers, we can see that shock absorber peeking through, and it almost looks like each one of those frame spacers is aligned with the center of our shock absorber. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale off the main drawing, which shows the position of the subframes, and I will write the measurements on my print and then place these frame spacers in here accordingly, and I will glue the whole thing together and let it completely set up. Well, we have 1/2 of the frame glued up. We're still waiting for it to completely cure. But once it does, we'll glue our second half on here, and then we'll clamp it up and leave it alone, making sure that everything is square. Guys, as you're gluing these in, make sure that you're squaring them up, because this is the basis for the rest of your model. You don't want it to be crooked. Now, if you make this crooked at this point, everything from here on in is not going to fit. So once we get this dried up or glued up and clamped, we can move on. And what we're going to move on to is getting these subframe assemblies made. Well, with the glue dry, we have given this a light sanding, and this is our frame. But we want to move on now to these axle gussets. Guys, we've already cut all the pieces that we need in order to make these, but we need to get this rabbet cut out of the end. You can do this at the scroll saw, the bandsaw. I'm actually going to do it at the table saw. So I've raised my blade to 3/16 of an inch to get the height properly, and using my miter fence, we're just going to make multiple passes to take away the material to get this rabbet cut out. A light sanding with a sanding block can finish it off and take away any of the teeth marks from this table saw blade. And then we need to drill this 11/64 hole in the end. There is no measurement here, guys, as to how far in it is, but I've scaled it off and it's 1/4 of an inch. So we'll get that centered on the 3/8 side. So at 3/16 of an inch in from each edge and 1/4 of an inch in from the end, we will drill the 11/64 hole, through hole, in all 6 of our gusset pieces. All right, and that is those pieces done. We can now move on to our axle brace hangers. We need to make 12 of these. And what I've done is I've taken some 1/8 inch thick material. In this case, I'm using walnut. I've cut it to the height that we need, which is 1.5 inches. And it's a little wider. We need it at 1 1/8, but this is more like 1 3/16. So all I'm going to do is at the bottom, I'm going to mark our 1 1/8. At the top, I'm going to come in the 5/8 that it calls for on the plans, just like that. And we will join those two lines together to give us our angle. And there it is. Now, guys, this angle, although it doesn't say it on the plans, I've measured it off, and it's a 19-degree angle. If you have an adjustable bevel in your shop, you can set it for 19 degrees and save yourself a little bit of extra marking just by lining it up with the mark here at 5/8 and then drawing down. So guys, in order to cut these, we're just going to take this over to the scroll saw. We're going to cut just outside the line here, and then I'm going to use the belt sander to finish this off to get all of our pieces. From there, we can drill our hole. In this case, it's a 5/32 hole, as we can see here on the drawing. And it will get drilled at 3/16 from the bottom and 1/4 of an inch in from the back edge. And we can drill all of those holes once we finish getting these shaped. And once you get all of those cut, We'll just use our MDF and our sandpaper just to give them a quick sanding. Well, I'm now going to move on to these shock absorbers, and all I've done is I have my universal pen mandrel here. I have a couple of bushings. These are actually to make razor handles, but it doesn't matter what bushings. It's just to space it out from this headstock of the mandrel. And I have several pieces, more than what I need. I only need 6 of these shock absorbers, but I've actually cut 9 pieces that are 3/8 of an inch thick, 1 inch by 1 inch square. And in the middle, I have drilled a 1/4 inch diameter hole to be able to allow me to mount them to this pen mandrel. And at this point, I'm going to turn all of these down over at the lathe until they are all 3/4 of an inch in diameter. Okay, and there are our 3/4 inch diameter circles. Now, we're going to readjust our pen mandrel to only accommodate one of these. And from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it back over to the lathe. I'm going to cut these chamfers that are here. And we don't really need to measure them, guys. That can just do that by eye. And then when we get that done, you'll have a piece that looks like this. Well, I know what everyone's thinking, and what they're thinking is, well, wait a second, Kenny, these shock absorbers on the plans don't have a hole in the middle. And you know what, guys, this is kind of a hidden feature here. As far as these shock absorbers go, they will end up getting glued onto our axles, which is going to hide the hole on one end, and then our frame sits on the top. But just to be consistent and what have you, I'm going to glue a 1/4 inch plug in here. Now, guys, I'm going to use a contrasting color just because I think it'll look good. But if you want, just cut some plugs out of the same species you make your shock absorbers out of and glue them in place. Alternatively, you can cut these from 3/4 inch dowel and sand the chamfer, but you won't get as perfect of a result. So I would rather have a contrasting dowel or a plug put in here in this hole in the center, sand it flush and have it kind of like a feature of the shock absorber than to have an imperfect looking unit. So guys, we're going to move on at this point to the brake drums. I'm not going to do a video on it. It's the exact same process that we're using right here to make these. I'm going to cut some stock. It is going to be 3/8 of an inch thick, and I'm going to drill that 1/4 inch diameter hole, mount them on my pen mandrel, and turn a 1 3/16 diameter circle to represent our brake drums. And when I get that done, I'll see you after that. And that will be our brake drums finished. Well, we're now going to make our air brakes, and we need 6 of them, guys, for this particular section of the build. It says here on the plans that it's a 55-degree angle, and they would not be wrong. It depends on what plane you measure it from. For us, we're going to count 90 degrees as 0 degrees as far as our miter fence goes, and we're going to set the miter fence to 35 degrees. From there, we can cut the end off of a 3/8 inch dowel, and then just use our miter box to cut it to length at 5/8 of an inch long. Well, I now want to make our subframe assemblies. So what I'm going to start off with is our brackets here, our upright brackets. We're going to actually glue them to our frame. I'm going to build it upside down because I want to take advantage of the flat surface here. So what I've done is I have placed marks all the way along, one at 2 7/8, one at 6 1/8, and the last one here at 9 3/8. And those are the marks that are listed on sheet 8 of 8 as to where these pieces go. So as I said, we're going to build it upside down, so I have my drawing upside down on the wall so that I don't get confused. So we're going to clamp a square to our frame. And what that is going to enable us to do is it is going to give us a reference point to have all 4 of our brackets all the way across squarely glued in place. And by referencing that straight edge, as I said, we're building this upside down, we can glue these pieces in place just like this, making sure that it looks like our drawing, which we've also placed upside down, like I said, so we don't get confused. So we're going to glue all of these in place at all 3 positions and let them set up. And then we can move on to the next step. Well, while we're waiting for this assembly to completely dry, we can glue our brake drums onto our axles. Guys, same thing as we've done before, except this time we're going to use a little bit of help from our pen mandrel, and that will help everything to be perfectly aligned. So we'll just put a little bit of glue on each end of our axle. The good thing about using the pen mandrel in this case is because of the knurled nut that goes on the end, it actually works as a clamp, and a great little clamp at that. So we can just spin this on here and tighten it down a little bit. All right, and we'll just clean up the squeeze out and we'll let this one dry, and we can move on with some other parts of the assembly while we're waiting. Well, following the drawing on page 8 of 8, I have installed these sections right here, which is our axle gussets, just temporarily with the 5/32 diameter axle pins. I showed you guys how to make axle pins a little earlier. The process is the same. We're waiting for our other axles to dry up as it is. So what we can do is I'm actually going to glue these pins in place. And from there, it's going to make it a little easier for me to work with. And I will glue, as our axles dry, I'll glue them in place here on our axle gussets and clamp them there in place so that they will sit properly here on the whole frame assembly. And of course, they are a little longer than what we need. I'm just going to flush cut those once they're dry. And with these assemblies dry, we can now glue in our axles. Now, guys, you'll want to glue them centered here on these gussets, and that will leave you 3/8 of an inch overhang on either side. So you can just use, if you have them, a 3/8 setup block, place it here beside your frame, and we can just set these in place. And before that has a chance to set up too much, we'll just pull out our spacer block, wipe the squeeze out off of it, and we'll just check our 3/8 on the other side. Yeah, and we are right on. So that's perfect. Looking good. Okay, we're going to clean up the squeeze out on this and glue in the other 2 axles. Well, we have various stages of the axles here in various stages of dryness, and we're kind of gluing it up as we go along. So at this point now, this first axle that we did is finished. We can take our air brakes here and we will glue them in place. And as well, we're going to take 2 of our shock absorbers and they will get glued here centered on our 3/8 inch gussets, just like this. They'll get centered on there, and they're going to have an overhang. I'm going to say they're going to overhang about 3/16 of an inch. I'm going to verify that on the plans, but that's the way I see it at the moment. 3/16 of an inch overhang off the end of these gussets and centered on the gussets. So we can get those glued in this axle and then progressively on the other ones as they dry. So I'm going to get all of this done, guys, gluing all of these in place, and I'm going to show you what you're looking at once you're finished. And that, unfortunately, is all the time that we have for this week. However, I want to touch on something from back at the last time we were here working on the model, when we finished off the truck. And in my closing statements, I mentioned about the rear spring brackets and the rear springs and how I never really found where those rear spring brackets went. And in fact, I had to modify the model, cut out the back of it, and the pieces didn't fit, et cetera, et cetera. But guys, here on the show, we have a really wide variety of people that watch the program. Some of them are model builders themselves, others are model designers. And it's always enjoyable to see, for me anyway, how different people with different skill sets interpret things differently. And no matter how many times I look at this drawing from Toys and Joys, I'll just give you a look at it here, the assembly drawing. No matter how many times I look at this, I do not see anything different than the interpretation that I gave you on the show. And yet I had a couple people contact me and said, you know what, I kind of interpreted that differently, and this is what I did. One sent me photos to show me what it was that he did, and it kind of makes sense. And then Dutchy from Dutchy's Patterns sent me photos, but not only did he send me photos, but then when the photos weren't clicking in my head for some reason, he actually went through the trouble of using his design softwares and made an assembly drawing of that rear axle and showed me his interpretations. And I checked on the plans, and when you do the math on it and check out where everything aligns, it works. It actually works. And even with that drawing, and even with Dutchy's assistance and a couple of other people's comments and private messages to me about their interpretation, I got to tell you, I still don't see it. I really still don't see it on the drawings. However, the interpretations were the same. Now, I have to say that Dutchy actually had the same interpretation as me at first, and then he rearranged his thinking, I guess, and managed to see it in a way that actually worked. And yet, no matter how much I stared at those drawings, I could not wrap my head around how this was possible. So I fixed it in a way that worked for me and made the model work. And guys, you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. I think that the assembly drawings on the Toys and Joys plans really should have been a little bit more clear if that was the intent from the get-go as to where those spring brackets and the springs go. Then you know what? I think that should have been a little better portrayed in the assembly drawings. But no harm, no foul. What I'm going to do is Dutchy has been extremely generous with this drawing and said, you know what, Kenny, if you want to share it, share it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to upload it to my website. I'm going to put it in the patterns section, the free patterns section. You can go there, you can check it out and download it for free, print it out, and then add it to your set of plans to help you when you're going to be reaching that point in the assembly. Either way, guys, I want to thank all of you that reached out to me about that assembly of the rear axle, and I especially want to thank Dutchy for his contribution. Guys, we are out of time this week. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We've got an amazing audience base, as this show just proves, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of that. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the content. I hope you're glad to be back to this model build and getting this trailer completed so we can get this thing out of the way and finished and be proud of it and move on. But more importantly, guys, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.